Welcome to the What Good Looks Like podcast, where we shine the spotlight on organizations and leaders who are truly living out what it means to champion the message and the work of purpose in the marketplace today. I'm your host, Davin Salvagno.
I find that people who go through some pretty traumatic experiences, when they get to the other side, it's like it transforms their life in some way. What am I supposed to do with all of this? And over time, I ended up understanding that, okay, this is my life's work. I need to take this into the business world.
Welcome back to the What Good Looks Like podcast. Today, I am here with Karin Volo. She is the founder of Evoloshen, the chief joy bringer, I love that title, at Evoloshen, and the author of multiple books. And she's coming at us today from across the pond, as it were, over in Europe. And Karin, thank you so much for being here today. I know we've juggled time zones and we've had to schedule this differently, but I am so grateful that you're taking the time to be here this morning.
Anything to talk to you, Davin, and to your audience. I'm happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
That's very, very kind. And I truly am grateful for you. One of the pleasures that we have many multiple friends, Chester Elton and Mark Braun, Kevin Monroe. And one of the joys that I've been able to experience is this group messaging that we've been a part of for, it feels like more than 6 months now, that almost every single day, just sharing what we're grateful for and what's been happening. And you've had a lot go on in the last 6 months in good ways. And but for those who don't know you or haven't heard your story, I want to take the time to hopefully introduce you to the audience and have you share about yourself so people can come to know and love the Karin that I've come to know and love over this last year.
Well, first of all, gratitude is an amazing tool. And, looking at life through the lens of gratitude is a way to lift yourself up emotionally and just your frequency and how you're showing up. And it's a really good way to shift your emotional state. So I love that. And I love that we are sharing in that group together. So we've gotten to know each other pretty well through that. For those that might not know who I am or haven't heard of me, I do run a company called Evoloshen, where our purpose is bringing joy to the workplace. And we basically transform companies through culture. And the reason I am on this journey and what brought me here was I have worked with individuals, coaching, mentoring for many years. I used to be a headhunter, so I was doing a lot with career coaching. And back in 2006, I'll just give you the quick synopsis of my story. I was ready to expand an executive search firm I was running here in Sweden throughout Europe. I was working with John Assaraf, who was a business coach back in those days with what we were working with in California, and went to the US and basically had this amazing week. Everything was going great. And right as I was getting ready to board the plane, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and my life changed 180 degrees in a matter of seconds, because there were 2 U.S. Marshals there. They had said 7 words that froze my life. They said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." And they proceeded to take me into custody. So what had happened was that my first husband, who I had divorced 6 years earlier, had used my name on his business dealings. And when I moved to Sweden and he was actually convicted of fraud, I found out that everything that he had told me was lies. So all of a sudden, here I am facing this. Everything is on top of the world, to everything, the rug being pulled out from underneath my feet and just my world turning 180 degrees to the absolute worst. And I ended up fighting an extradition case to Mexico and sat in this jail cell for 1,352 days. That is a long time. It's almost 4 years. It's 3 years, 9 months, and 9 days. I counted every single day, and it was a nightmare situation. And trying to get through that time. In the end, and there's a whole lot of stuff that happened in between, but in the end, my charges were dropped. I was completely released, exonerated, and I was able to come back to Sweden and come back to my life, which is what I had been visualizing and really doing a lot of work to, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, get myself back into my whole life. And, I find that people who go through some pretty traumatic experiences, when they get to the other side, it's like it transforms their life in some way. And I came home and I realized I can't go back to the headhunting. I'm supposed to teach some of these things I learned. I'm supposed to take this into the business world. I had no idea how I was going to do that. So it was a bit of a journey. And during those first couple of years, actually, I was trying to figure out, why did I go through all of that? What's my purpose? Why am I even here? What am I supposed to do with all of this? And over time, I ended up understanding that, okay, this is my life's work. I need to take this into the business world, and ended up writing a business book. Now, it's interesting because I knew when I got home, I was going to write my personal story, which is called 1,352 Days. That's my memoir. But that got put on the side burner because a business book came out of me. I say it came out of me because I was really guided to write this. And the book was called Engage. And it was really looking at companies that were doing really well, and they had these great cultures and employees loved being there. And it was like, what are they doing differently? They have something in their, the water they're drinking, whatever it might be, that they're doing differently. And so it was a year-long journey researching companies, talking to leaders, and it ended up being this book, Engage. And that really became the catalyst to the work I do, which I've been doing now for over a decade with Evoloshen. And so it led me into speaking about culture and engagement and why that's so important. And then really the first year was talking about that. And then the second, or after the first year, was like, I kept getting asked, can you show us how to do this? We understand how it's so important and how it impacts the bottom line. Can you show us? So I developed a certification training, and that certification training led to teaching people how to work with culture and shift people's behaviors. And inside of that training, I actually have a lot of the tools and things that I learned to survive during those 4 years, because what I found, and kind of the catalyst for writing Engage, was coming across the research for positive psychology. I'd never heard of that before. And basically it's the study of what's going well, right? It's not analyzing your whole life story from your parents and why, you blame everything on your parents for your lousy childhood. But it's really focused in on what's going well. And gratitude is so tied into that as well. And so it really has been, like I said, the book Engage was the catalyst for the work I'm doing today. And it's just been quite the journey over the last decade, because oftentimes people don't like their jobs. They don't feel good there. The number one cause of, illnesses is stress. The number one cause of stress is the workplace. And so I've noticed, and especially over the last couple of years, and we can talk about this as well, but, with the whole pandemic experience, people are reevaluating their lives. They're trying to figure out, why am I here? What's important? What are my priorities? Do I really want to work for this company? And I have found that the companies that have worked very deliberately with their culture and created a place where people could feel safe and grounded during those last couple of years, like, they're doing okay. The rest of the world can be chaos, but if they feel that connection to their coworkers and to their workplace, they feel really good there. The opposite is also true. If it's a toxic environment, they don't feel good, they're moving. That's why you see the Great Resignation. That's why you see quiet quitting, all of these trends that are coming up, because people are not going to tolerate things that don't bring them happiness, joy, make them feel good, and basically are, life enhancing things in their life that they need. So, long story to get into everything that we've talked about in terms of, my life story and the catalyst here. I gave you the short version, believe it or not.
Well, I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad that you jumped right into that, because when you first told me that story, and thank you for sharing so vulnerably here on this podcast about that, the depth, imagining, you have this plan for your life, and all of a sudden one sentence changes the entire thing, a tap and one sentence. And now all of a sudden you lose almost 4 years of your life, and your entire world is upside down. And the piece as a parent for me, we didn't get into it, but you talked about how that impacted you as a mother and with your daughters, and the separation that involved there. And there's so much that people can look at that, and they can become bitter, and they can start to question why, and they can become the victim. And that you could have gone down a very dark path, but instead you had this unimaginable thing happen to you. Your life was turned upside down. You lost 4 years of it. You lost this time, being able to have a front row seat to watching your daughters grow up. And instead you take this and somehow say, I want to make the world a better place. And that blows my mind that that is how you responded to it, that you said, okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it in a memoir. People are going to understand what happened, but then I'm going to write this business book. And I want people to experience joy. I want them to experience fulfillment. I want to challenge companies to create places that do that, because the reality is life is too short for us to go through it and waste any time. And I don't want to give the answer to the question that I'm about to ask you, because I think that I know what it is. But could you bridge for us how you made that decision in your head? How did you go from, I lost 4 years of my life, I could be very bitter, I could be very angry, but instead I'm going to take this and do something incredibly purposeful with it. And I'm the problem that I want to solve in the world is helping people not go through life wasting time, missing out on joy and fulfillment, and to challenge companies to do something about that.
Yeah, so the short answer to that, Davin, is basically it was a very conscious and deliberate choice. Part of that was in those 4 years, I truly felt deep in my heart that it was happening for a bigger purpose. My little story was going on, but there was something bigger going on that I couldn't put my hand on it back then. I couldn't even start to write the book, my personal story. I knew I wanted to write the story because I had gone through, I thought there was part one of, having this marriage with this guy who was abusive and, turned out to be completely lying to me from day one. I thought that was the book, right, that I was going to write. I didn't know there was a part 2 where I had to lose 4 years of my life. My daughters at the time were 6 and 8, so I missed a significant portion of their life. But I was meditating in this horrific environment for about 3 hours a day, not consistently, but in different times. And so I really got very connected spiritually. And that was kind of my salvation, or whatever you want to call it, to just hold me through and to look at things from a very different perspective in terms of, okay, this is a day in my life and I'm probably going to live to at least 80. So, okay, a year's gone by, but that's still just a small portion of my life. So I learned tools to stay in a positive frame of mind. And because I was meditating so much, I actually started to write children's books for my daughters, which were called Bringing Joy to the World. So the whole joy theme started from there, because it's a little character of a girl who her name is Joy. And when I came out of that, I thought that was kind of my life mission, is to get those books out. And I have published some of them. But then when I realized, I've always worked in the corporate environment with companies and professionals, I realized very quickly that that's who I'm meant to serve. And I think one of the things that I've learned along the way is to listen to that intuition and to listen to that, that nudge that you get inside to go do this or talk to that person, because I didn't do that when I was, meeting my first husband and getting into the whole relationship with him. My first reaction when I met him was stay away from this guy, and I didn't listen to that. And I paid dearly. So for me, listening to your intuitive hits or, that inner guidance is really important. So anyway, coming home, I just really have always felt, and through those 4 years even, I felt there was something bigger going on. And I felt very guided to use this. So I made a very deliberate choice not to be bitter, not to be angry, and to use this as a catalyst, as the fuel. I mean, my biggest thing is my revenge is getting this message out there and helping people and, giving them tools that they can transform their lives. And over the years, I've gotten deep into studying neuroscience and how we're all human beings. And I've seen with the people who have gone through our trainings in multiple countries, how we're all human beings. It doesn't matter what culture we come from, what country we live in. If we can rise above that and understand how we are hardwired as human beings, and, if we can learn to not respond or react to situations, but to respond and put a little bit of space and be deliberate, and to have that, kind of higher level of emotional intelligence to manage situations, it is so empowering. It's like taking your power back, and you don't become a victim, you become a victor. And that was really what was driving me the whole time, and still does, to this day. I just can't stop not doing what I do, because this is my life's purpose.
That is so, So powerful. And it's very genuine and very authentic as I've come to know you over this last year. First of all, you are one of the most joyful, most grateful, most authentic people that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting virtually anyway, because we haven't been able to meet in person, haven't been able to get to Europe yet, but
Yet.
have some news that I'll be sharing with you shortly that might change that in 2024. But we'll talk about that. But here's something that I had an aha moment as you were sharing that is it often takes people losing time to realize how precious time is. We don't measure it. We measure everything else. We measure money, we measure KPIs, we measure all sorts of things, but we don't measure our time. And we can't, no matter what we do, we can't get time back. We can always make more money. We can always improve results. We can always make more things. But the one thing that we can do nothing about is adding time to our lives. And then suddenly when a piece of it is gone, you recognize how valuable that is. This is why when people have near-death experiences, all of a sudden they reevaluate their entire life. It is why, to your earlier point, the whole world just went through COVID. And now everyone's reevaluating their life and their choices. And if they're going to spend their time working, they want it to be meaningful. They want it to be joyful. They want it to be something that is not wasted. And up until COVID, I don't really think people thought about that unless you had a near-death experience or you lose 4 years of your life the way that you did. And so I think what had happened is you realized how valuable time was. And just being the person that you are, you wanted to bring that message to the world and say, listen, your life, your time here is short, it's valuable, and you should experience joy and gratitude in every minute of it. And we spend the most of our time at work. And so if there's a place where we're going to impact how people experience joy and gratitude, what better place to do it than in the workplace?
Yeah. And, I love how over the last few years, these softer sides of business like purpose, trust, joy, gratitude, all of these things, they have been researched up the yin yang. We can document to say, this is how much it impacts the bottom line. This is how much it impacts in health and well-being. So you don't have sick days, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these things that used to be considered the softer sides of business are very tangible, very measurable. And I think it's great because if you look at culture, that is actually a business asset. I know we have a mutual friend with Gary Ridge, and he talks about, his board looked at this as a asset because he was able to prove the billions of dollars, how much the company had improved over the years he was in the CEO role. And it just shows. And I've seen other CEOs like this. One of the things that I love to do is find these purpose-driven leaders and interview them. So I have my own podcast called the Amazing Leader Series, and I've seen the common thread between a lot of these leaders where they either, on a personal level, they might not be as open about it professionally, but they have gone through some sort of transformation and they get to the point where it's almost like a self-actualization. If you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where they want to use business as a force of good. And so they use the business as a vehicle and develop the people, and they love to see people succeeding. And it's so refreshing to see that this is I wouldn't say it's the norm, but I would say we're heading over that direction, because to attract and retain top talent in these companies, you've got to have that great culture. Otherwise, you're not going to get the good people there. So it's kind of this full circle of how we feel at work, what brings us joy. I don't know if you know Dr. Paul Zak, he's a neuroeconomist.
Yes.
Yeah. So he wrote a book called The Trust Factor. And in that book, there was this one chapter that he defined the formula, and it was joy is equal to purpose plus trust. And as soon as I read that, I reached out to him. I've got to interview you. You've just described my life's work in 3 words. And so we did. We had a great interview and a great conversation. But what he's saying is that trust and purpose are the levers that we can use inside of an organization to create more joy. And I love that he's even talking about joy, because for me, joy, the definition there is happiness infused with love. Joy is something that comes from inside versus, things that make you happy are kind of the external thing, the nice car, or the, whatever. But joy is something that you can feel inside. And I know that because even if I was in that horrific environment. When I was writing the children's books for my daughters, I actually felt joy. It made me happy. It made me feel like, oh, I'm doing something productive. My entire life is not completely wasting away. After all, here, I'm getting something out of this, you know? And so I think regardless of our situations and what's happening, joy, love, and gratitude are like our superpowers. Those are superpowers that can shift our emotional state. And when we understand the power of our emotional state, if we, the world is in chaos right now. There's so much going on and it's scary and you can be bombarded, and we are actually bombarded by a lot of negativity. And I've always said we have to counterbalance that. I used to say 3 to 5 positives for every negative. Now I'm saying about 10 positives for every negative because there's so much coming in.
Yeah.
But that's where I use gratitude so much. So my long lists of gratitude is because it's a muscle. I've been using it for so long, but it helps. And I have had so many people come to me and say, this has changed my life, when they create the habit of, focusing in on what they love, what brings them happiness and joy, and what they're grateful for.
So good. You said something so powerful that I had never thought of until you just shared it. And it's this difference between joy and happiness. And I know that there's a difference between the two, and I've looked at it, but I've never looked at it through the lens of joy is happiness infused with love. And you mentioned Gary Ridge, and he has a saying that I love. It's one of my favorite quotes of his, where he says, happy cultures create happy workers create happy families create happy communities create a happy world, and we need a happy world. And there's an emphasis on the happy piece there. And I love that. And there's a lot of companies that are trying to make employees happy because it's good for business, because it's good for metrics, because it's good for the bottom line. All the research that you just mentioned, there's no shortage of research to show that purpose and happiness in cultures leads to higher performance, higher profitability. If you are still trying to prove that to yourself, then you're never going to prove it to yourself, because the research has been out there for decades around that. But what you said was happiness plus love equals joy. How many companies are loving their people? They're trying to make them happy, but are they also genuinely loving them? So if you can help your people be happy at work, but also genuinely love them, and they experience happiness at work and your genuine love for them as a person, as a human being, well, then they experience joy at work. Mm-hmm. How do you do that through your work?
We do a lot of training. So there's kind of, under the umbrella of culture, which is the space I work in, there are what I call 3 pillars to culture. One is engagement, and that's why I started working and doing a lot of work and shifting people's behaviors, and a lot of emotional awareness and helping with leaders. And then purpose is the second pillar. Companies need to have that bigger purpose of why they're doing what they're doing. It's very powerful when an individual knows their own personal purpose and they are aligned with the company purpose. That's like magic starts to happen there. Not that that happens that often, but it's a good thing. And then the last pillar is trust. And what I have found over the years, and I've been pulled into the space of trust so much, because that is really the foundational place. If you have high levels of trust and good relationships there, it's so much easier to do the rest of the work. And the irony of me having to be in the space of trust and teach trust is not lost on me, because I was someone who was far too gullible and trusting of, individuals in my lifetime and my first husband and things like that. So, it's one of those things that comes full circle. But spending time with leaders who genuinely understand and value this and really want to make the shift inside of their companies, that is like the sweet spot, because I've just found that if the leaders don't buy into it, it's so much harder to get stuff to stick, because people want to do this. Employees want to have a place where they feel great. HR, managers, etc. They all want to create that environment, but it needs to start at the top and trickle down. They've got to walk the talk, basically. And, it's funny because one of my questions I love to ask CEOs is, why do you think people are excited to get up in the on a Monday morning and go to work? And I can't even tell you how many times I've gotten, yeah, to increase shareholder value. And I just look at them like, are you nuts? Why are you even saying that? It's like, don't you want people to love their work? And I actually do use the word love quite a bit. And, you know, it used to be a little bit taboo. You don't talk about love in the workplace. But for me, love, I have an acronym, which is living on vibrant energy. And then I've even heard, like, in the corporate world, living our values every day. So those are kind of the two acronyms that I like to use. And it's true, because if you ask and you generally want, you know, an answer on this, you want your people to love what they do. There are, and like you said earlier, they're going to be more productive. They're going to be more engaged. They're going to be, you know, more effective in their work. They're not going to be as sick, all of those things. So, yeah, I mean, it's so interrelated, and it's like this web that we weave, and you know, we spend so much time at work. We should be loving what we do. And you know, I feel bad for the people that don't. And a lot of the work that I do is just empowering people, raising their level of awareness. And, you know, it's so interesting, because when I start to talk about the neuroscience, people will start to self-identify, because oftentimes if you've got a bad, we'll call it bad manager, they are often so unaware of themselves. They don't know the impact that they have with others, how they say things. They just aren't aware of that.
That's right.
And as soon as that awareness starts to come to light in a very non-threatening way, that's when you can start to transform people's lives. That's when they can start to, you know, see the difference just by having that level of awareness. So yeah, if you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about what I do.
I know. I love it. Love it. I mean, that's why we get along so well, as we both are like-minded and like-hearted about wanting to do something about this. You know, my heart was breaking. I was at the gym this morning, and I'm sitting there getting ready, just finished working out, and I was getting dressed. And there's literally these two guys in the corner, and all they're doing is complaining about their bad manager at work. The day hasn't even started yet. This is like 7 a.m. and they're already starting their day off in a negative mind frame, complaining about what they have to go into and who's not answering emails and why they're not doing that and all the corporate red tape and blah, 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 blah. And I'm sitting here, I'm saying, do people realize the impact that they have by not getting this right? There are human beings waking up, starting their days. They haven't gotten in the door yet, and they're already starting their days thinking about this versus thinking about what they get to do, the impact that they will make, the difference that they will be able to make, seeing that they're valued, looking forward to seeing their manager or leader and recognizing that that's someone who's going to support them, encourage them. And if they're going to challenge them, they're going to challenge them in a way that is loving, because they want to see that person be better. They want to see them fulfill their potential and their purpose. And that's been one of my biggest struggles, Karin, is I feel like there's really two camps. Ron Carucci, another friend of ours, on the previous podcast episode, he mentioned that there's kind of three camps, and that's, you have people that are doing this purpose stuff, and they're doing it to be a force for good in the world. I love the phrase "business as a force for good." I know Lippert uses that. They partnered with us on the Purpose Summit last year, and that was the theme of the summit. You recently had Lippert on a conversation, which was fantastic, by the way. And so there are companies that are getting this right, multi-billion-dollar publicly traded global companies that this, you know, purpose isn't fluff, it's foundational, that recognize that their business can be a force for good in the world, and they can help people start their day the right way, with joy, with gratitude, looking forward to what they get them to do, and experiencing optimum performance and potential. Then there are companies that are approaching this conversation with, well, the research says it's good, so I'm going to do it because it'll yield the numbers. They're not doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it because it's good for business versus business being a force for good. Those are two completely different mindsets. Yeah. And then to Ron's point on our previous podcast, he said, well, then there's companies that just haven't bought into purpose at all. They don't even believe that is good for business, and you have to convince them of that. And I'm not really sure there's any hope for those organizations. What I want to ask you is, how do you bridge the gap between the previous two? How do you bridge the gap between companies who engage you and they see that this is good for business, but what they want to do is make business a force for good. How do you get them to take that leap?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I've seen this trend. You've heard of the triple bottom line, right? People, planet, purpose, or
Yeah.
people, planet, and profits. And I have seen over the years, because I've been around a few decades, when the Sarbanes-Oxley, Enron scandal happened in the early 2000s, it was all about, any public company had to have an internal auditing department to have transparency. And it became just the way we do business. And then corporate social responsibility movement came on. And again, leaders were like, oh, well, we should be doing this. It looks good. We can do it for marketing, whatever. But eventually, the people who were doing the work started to show this is impacting our bottom line. Our customers are liking this. They're, more dedicated or more loyal to us because of this. And it became not just the way we do business, but it became integrated. And then the leaders started to buy into it. So that was kind of the planet. And then we have the people. And that's where, I've been working the last decade, basically, in engagement, and people starting to realize that, and the languaging is changing. We used to call it human resources. It still is quite a bit, but it's changing to people and culture, or whatever the case might be. And language is so important, but I think leaders are starting to realize how important people are. And many of them are, yes, okay, it's good for the business, but then eventually they see, wow, this is really good. And eventually they do start to see, well, we can use business as a force for good. A lot of these leaders, like I said, who have that mindset of using business as a force for good, they've gone through some personal transformation themselves. Like I said, whether they are not so public about it or not, but there's something in them that is drawing them to be, and a lot of the kind of terminology we hear is servant leadership and things like that. So I think eventually we'll get to the point where engaged people, that's just going to be expected. I mean, you see this young workforce coming in. Yes, they want good companies and they want good salaries, but they are definitely looking and asking tough questions about, am I aligned with this company? Do I believe in the products? Are the values aligned with me? And those are tough questions that, maybe our generation weren't asking back then. And then the last pillar, I don't know if you've heard of this, but the quadruple bottom line. So you got people, planet, profits, and then purpose. And so purpose is going to be one of those things that right now, okay, yeah, it looks good. 180 CEOs have signed on to this, whatever it was a few years ago, saying we're going to be purpose driven. Maybe they were doing it just because it looks good for the business, but eventually it will be seeping into the DNA of the companies. And I think part of that process will be that the truly authentic purpose driven companies and purpose driven leaders are going to attract the talent. And these other companies are going to fall to the wayside because they're not going to have the talent and they're not going to have the competitive edge because they don't have the right people on board. So I see the transition happening. It just takes time, but we're all evolving. That's why I call my company Evoloshen,
So good. I love the name, and it's so purposeful. And I wish we were in the same room with a whiteboard right now, because as you were talking about that, I was literally drawing it out as you were walking through it. And you talked about the triple bottom line of planet, people, and profit, and then this fourth element of purpose. And as you were saying that, initially, I went from seeing 3 circles to seeing 4 circles. And then it occurred to me that, how we make this transition from purpose being good for business to business being a force for good is when purpose is in the center of those other 3 things. When you recognize that the purpose of your business is for the people, for the planet, and for profit, when you understand that purpose isn't a sideshow to these other 3, that it's the foundational centerpiece of how you impact your people, how they impact the world, and then obviously how you remain profitable so that you can continue to do those other 2 things, then your business becomes a force for good. So good. Karin, I love spending time on our conversations together, and it's amazing to me how quick a half hour goes by. But I just want to take a few minutes here to wrap up. For those listening today, if there's one thing that you can leave with them, either as an individual, either as a leader of an organization, what would you have to say to them?
Love that question. I think we need to take ownership of our emotional state, our own purpose, figure out, Mark Twain said the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. So figure out your purpose, because if you do that, like, you become unstoppable, and it gives you a direction, a compass of how to proceed forward in your life. And we all have our own innate gifts and talents and skills that we have. And when we are using them in a very purpose-driven way, it's like magic starts to happen in your life. So the takeaway here is just to understand everything is within you. Everything you need is within you. And what I love to do is kind of the inner work on individuals, but then also organizationally. And that inner work is figuring out the purpose. It's figuring out what your values are, what's important to you, and then how you want to express that in your day-to-day life. And when those are aligned, that's when beautiful things start to happen, and you feel great about your life and you have lots of joy.
So good. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself, your work, your story with us today. For those who are listening, you constantly put out tremendous amounts of valuable content on all sorts of social media platforms. I'm digesting it every single day. For those who are listening today, what is the best place for them to follow you, reach you, and to continue to engage your message?
Yeah, I'm really active on LinkedIn, so reach out there, definitely. Evoloshen is spelled differently, so it's Evoloshen. And I always love to give value, and I have a ton of free reports there that we, have published throughout the years. So if you go to our website, which is Evoloshen, evoloshen.com/reports, that will get you to where you can get reports on culture and trust and virtual activities for engagement with hybrid teams and all sorts of different great resources there. So that's a great place to start getting in touch and contact.
So awesome. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself and your work with the world. It is more important than ever. Thank you for giving of your time today. I can't wait to continue the conversation throughout the rest of this year and into next year in our group chats and in other platforms. And at some point, to be at the Purpose Summit together in the same room, which might be in Europe in 2024. Stay tuned.
Ooh.
More to come. Little teaser. So thank you, Karin, for everything. Appreciate it. For those of you listening today, again, here with Karin Volo, she is the founder of Evoloshen. She is also the Chief Joy Bringer. I love that title. I encourage you to challenge what is it that you're bringing each day. And she's the author of multiple books. Please follow her on LinkedIn. Check out her works on Amazon. Remember, books are sold. And tune in next time to the What Good Looks Like podcast.